Now that we've imported all of the media into our project, we need to create a sequence. A sequence is kind of a container for our media files where we'll actually do the editing and arranging everything the way we want to, and the sequence is what we'll be exporting into a final video file. There are multiple ways to create a sequence. You can simply come up into File, New, and then select to create a new sequence. The shortcut key for that is Ctrl or Command and N. At the bottom of the project panel, you'll also find this little new item icon. If you click on that, you'll also be able to create a whole bunch of different types of files within your project. The top one is a sequence, so let's simply select to create a new sequence. And Premiere Pro is going to pop up the new sequence dialog. Now, first off, at the bottom here, we have to give our sequence a name. Let's call this one My First Edit. And then in the top here, you'll find a very large amount of different presets for the settings that you want to use for your sequence. Now, the most important settings for your sequence that we need to define is the frame size, which is the width and height of the final video that we're going to export, as well as the pixel aspect ratio that you'll see in brackets here as 1. And the pixel aspect ratio actually just refers to the fact that not all pixels are created equal. Not all pixels are square. Some cameras actually record video in a format where the pixels are a little bit more elongated, so you may have a pixel aspect ratio that is not 1:1, but that's usually more for older cameras. Most modern DSLRs or mirrorless cameras, even the mobile phone, shoots at a square pixel aspect ratio, so that's usually going to be 1. Then we need to define the frame rate, how many frames per second you want to have. Now, a lot of handheld cameras and mobile phones shoot at 30 frames per second. Movies and cinema and TV generally use 24 or 23.976 frames per second. So depending on the feel that you want your final video to have, you may want to pick one or the other. And then you also need to define your sample rate, which is the quality of the output audio. Most of the times you will be fine just using 48,000 Hertz, which is what most cameras and audio recorders will record in anyway. Now, as you select all of these presets here on the left side, you'll see some of these settings change. The one I'm going to pick is under Digital SLR 1080p, which is 1080 vertical pixels, so that's a resolution of 1920 by 1080. I'm going to select this first preset, DSLR 1080p at 24 frames per second. And over on the right hand side, you can see what those settings are. You can also come up into the settings here at the top and customize them yourself. So in here, you'll find things like the frame rate to use, as well as the frame size, so the width and height of your output video. The pixel aspect ratio, again, most of the time you can just leave that on 1 and not worry about it. If your videos end up being squished or stretched, you may have to change the pixel aspect ratio, and then you need to check out what the pixel aspect ratio of the video files are that you've recorded with your camera. Further down, the sample rate for the audio, I'm going to leave on 48,000 Hertz. And then there's a few more settings down here that we don't need to worry about for now. The one final thing that I want to point your attention to is in the Tracks tab. Now, every sequence is actually going to contain multiple video and multiple audio tracks so that you can layer videos on top of each other, or you can layer audio on top of each other. So you can have someone talking, but under that you have music and maybe some sound effects. And same with the video. You may have a general video. You may have a little picture-in-picture, like a small square of yourself talking over a gameplay video or something like that. Or you may have text layers and other things. So here you can define how many video tracks you want. So by default, that is 3, as well as how many audio tracks you want. And you can actually give your audio tracks names here. You could call one voiceover, one music, and one sound effect. And you can add other audio tracks to it, but you'll be able to do that later on anyway. So let's simply hit OK to actually create our first sequence. And here in the project panel, you will now find a sequence called My First Edit. You will also note that the timeline itself now says My First Edit, and this is the timeline for this particular sequence. This is now the timeline where we'll be able to add all of our media files, our music, our images, our video, arrange them and edit them. And this sequence we can then export into a video file. If for whatever reason you've closed your sequence, you can see right now we're back on the timeline and there's nothing selected here, or you have multiple sequences in the same project and there's nothing stopping you from creating as many sequences as you want within the same project, you can simply double click onto that sequence in your project panel. That's going to open that up again, and then you're ready to do your editing. Finally, if you're unhappy with the settings that you chose for your sequence, and by the way, if you hover over the sequence, those should be blended in. So this is 1920 by 1080, pixel aspect ratio of 1 at 24 frames per second with 48,000 Hertz audio settings. You can right click on the sequence, come up into sequence settings, and then you can change those settings again, so you can tweak your sequence even after the fact, so don't worry about it. But now that we've created the sequence, let's actually start adding some media into the sequence and start getting into the actual editing workflow in the next lesson.